The topic of today and the title, which is Why Should I Even Bother Going to a Temple, is not about being offensive to anyone, but instead, it definitely is a provocative question, but that which is realistic and something that the rational mind and the teenager of today, the inquiring young adult, constantly will be asking and is asking as to why should I even come to a temple? Why should I even bother going to a temple? Now you see, if God is everywhere and divinity is everything around us, then clearly, why do I need another specially constructed place for me to go and seek the vision or the visibility of the divine? It's a pretty rational question in that sense. And as always, the Gita and the Upanishads have an answer to it. And that's what we are going to look at it today. Now, many of you may be saying, yes, God is everywhere. Yes, divine means everything. However, a temple has a special place because there is a consecration that happens. With that consecration, the divinity is infused into that form. I'm not going to challenge that. And trust me, I say this with humility. I'm absolutely knowledgeable about that. But for the rational inquiring mind, it still doesn't answer the question. Well, if that is the case, why are thousands of temples neglected? Why are they crumbling? And then, of course, the logical answer there is, well, people haven't done their part to protect and preserve those temples, which means even in a temple where the deity has an infusion of divinity, the responsibility to protect and preserve the temple is in the importance given by the community, the person, to that structure, to that deity. It is in the perceiving eyes through which we give it the importance and we take care of a temple. So for a rational mind, it's obvious and pretty critical that we address the very fundamental fact as to why do we need to go to a temple? Why should they even bother going to a temple? Now, I'm using the term God here in a very loose sense. Probably by now you have recognized I tend to stay away from this label God, not because anything is wrong or anything with it. I just, as a preference and being true to the Gita and the Upanishad, I like to use the term divine or the supreme, because divinity is all encompassing everything without that limitation aspect. It includes what we consider good and bad as well in it. And of course, there's so many videos already on this topic. You are welcome to watch those. And I've created a playlist also under spiritual foundations, where you will have much more detailed descriptions on divinity, supreme, absolute, God, how do you perceive gods and deities and all of those. So you're welcome to watch those. Coming back to this topic of temple, and when we look at it from an Upanishadic perspective or a Vedantic perspective, and the perspective of the Gita, then we have to remember that worship in the Gita and the Upanishad was to the natural elements. That's the fundamental premise. It's to the natural elements that makes up this divinity, that makes up the substance. In fact, in the Gita, in chapter 7, verse number 4, Krishna actually does describe this, the natural elements. Bhumihi, earth, apaha, water, analaha, fire, Vayuhu, wind, Kham, space, Manaha, mind, Buddhihi, intellect, Evacha, Ahankaram, the I, the myself, the manifestation of the I, not the contemporary ego that we call, but it's really all of this manifesting in me as an individual, the I, Ahankara, Itiyam me, Binna, divisions, they create these divisions. Prakriti Ashtada, the entire nature is divided into Ashtada, eight divisions. Again, Bhumihi, Apaha, Analaha, Vayuhu, Kam, Manaha, Buddhihi, Ahankaram. 8 divisions or 8 fundamental substances. So the Gita and the Upanishad, from a perspective of that, worship was to these natural elements. And out of this, the fire element was very important. And why was the fire element important? Because fire represented the very fundamental form that's visible to us through the sun. So sun, light is through light, fire. So fire was a representative of the most visible form of divinity. And fire out of these 8 elements occupied a very central place. Which is why in the Gita and Upanishad, everything is about offering oblations to the fire. So from a temple standpoint, the Upanishad and the Gita really did not have this concept of a temple. And the household during the Vedantic times was very self-contained. In fact, every household has 3 types of fires, which is, one is called the Garapatya or the householder fire. This usually was passed on from ancestor to descendant. So this was a fire that was always lighted in the house. They never used to blow this fire out. So it was a fire that was always burning in the house. Gharapatya. In fact, even now, if you go to some temples and everything, you would always see a lamp always lit. Even in many homes, there's always a lamp that's always lit. Why? It represents the fire of that house. It represents the light of that house. And through that light, you heat it up. So from a Vedic standpoint, the sun sets in the evening. In other words, the energy diminishes. You light the Garapatya fire is then used to light up, to cook, to heat. And then from that heat, you transfer the energy of the sun to another fire called Ahavaniya. And that is the fire where you are offering all the sacrifices into the Ahavaniya fire. So the Garapatya, which is the householder fire, is always lit. From that, you light up another fire. And in that fire, you offer your oblations. Essentially, from a cosmic standpoint, what it means is, as energy drops, you're heating it up to raise the energy, and then you are transferring that energy and transmitting that energy into another fire and making it stronger. That's the cosmic meaning of it, and that's exactly how the Upanishadic and the Vedic fire and the oblations used to be offered. Now, out of this other fire, the Avaniya fire as well, there was a third fire, Dakshinagni, which was lit in the south, that was always lit to protect that household from any type of evil forces, as they would call it. But also, more importantly, when somebody would pass away in that house or die, the body used to be cremated using that fire. So again, the Upanishadic household was self-contained. Everything was happening right there. There was no concept of temple. The temple concept came later. It was more, I would ask you to check back on the video of Sanatana Dharma, or the real meaning of it, or the evolution of religion, where I've covered how the temple concept came through, or rather the stage where it came through, which was more in the Puranic times, before it evolved into the modern Hinduism. Now, the temples were essentially evolved more for socio and economic conditions. To provide a stability in the community is why you had the temple. So as an example, the temple was constructed in the epicenter of the village so that the village has one common place where everything can converge towards. That's why even now when you go to villages and towns in India, you would see the temple to be central, in the center of the town or village. So the temple was constructed in the epicenter. It was used for community betterment. So under the eyes of a god, under the eyes of a god, you were taking on community betterment programs. You were making decisions on what is right versus wrong. It was all happening under the purview, under the shadow, under the watchful eyes of that deity, of that god. So it was a place for community betterment. Third thing, as temple evolved, was the architecture and the strategic location made it possible for the temple to be a place of shelter. What do I mean by that? Like, the temples were built on hills, which is why even now, if you go to some of the very ancient temples, they are built on a series of hills. And the temple on a hill provided a fantastic location for the village to take shelter in the event of a flood or in the event of heavy rains, as an example. The temple became that place where everybody could be given shelter, everyone could be served food. So the strategic architectural location of that made it possible. That is the third reason. Fourth, it was a place of charity. A lot of sharing and giving used to happen in temples. Clothing, food, money, you name it. Everything used to happen in a temple. Lastly, it was a place of education. Higher learning, like the learning we are having now, was imparted in a temple. Later, it got transitioned to gurukuls or special schools run for that purpose. But temple, nevertheless, never lost their significance in education. So it became a place of higher learning. So 5 reasons why the temples evolved later from the Vedantic system. It evolved. One, inhabitants spread, communities spread, right? It was no longer possible to have all the 3 fires running in a household. It was very difficult to impart education to a spread community, very difficult. And there had to be a way by which everything would converge so that education can become and be given to a captive audience. That was very important. In that sense, it evolved, and that's where the temple movement started. Catering to the 5 aspects, which is what? Epicenter, community-oriented, architectural, strategic location, charity, and education. Now, the later years, as the spread of temples, as the Bhakti movement, as I was saying in one of the earlier videos, as devotion towards a personal form, nama and rupa, personal form and name grew, as diversity increased in devotion, so different subsects came together, there was the divisions started to get wiped out, and anybody could come and pray. As all of that started happening, the number of temples started increasing, and there was time now where there had to be some type of standardization. And there were scriptures to this regard called agamas that then were evolved in that regard, where agamas now started prescribing standards. What should be the height of a deity? What should be the height of a temple? What should be the shape of a temple be? What should be the width and the breadth of the room where the main deity is consecrated? All of this started being written in the agamas, or the scriptures that define the characteristics of how a temple has to be built. Even there were a couple of divisions in the agamas. I'm not going to go deeper into that. That's not the purpose of, at least at this moment of this channel. At a later date, I'm happy to cover more into that. But for now, suffice to say, there were some standards and scriptures that were written and created to help standardize and to put things into perspective. And they were done with a very scientific approach and in view. Simple example, like the bell of the temple. There's a very scientific reason to the shape of that bell, to the vibrations it creates. There's a very scientific reason to the height in which the main deity is consecrated, so that the vibrations can come back. So there was science infused into all these scriptures as they were written and as things got standardized. And through that standardization and through the way they were written, the temple then essentially became a place where energies could converge. Energies could converge, which is why there was a soothing feeling when somebody would go to a temple, just because of the nature in the way it was constructed, the nature in the way the traditions were being followed, and then the follow-up rituals were adopted. All of that made the temple even a little more special place where that was happening. So temples essentially did become a place where convergence of energy would happen. Now, for the logical mind, hopefully this all makes sense. Another analogy I can give is, it's like you have air all around you, but you still turn on a ceiling fan so that you have a concentrated force of energy, force of air that is gushing out. Same way, the temple serves as that concentrated force of energy. You have divinity everywhere, no doubt about it. Nobody is going to refute that. However, the temple gives you a place where everything gets channeled. Now, when can this happen though? When the temple is truthful and follows a certain set of ethical practices, is focused on developing and enhancing a peaceful, righteous mind, and you are able to resonate with it, only then, of course, will you find aligned to the principles of the temple, will you find the temple to be attractive, which is precisely why there may be 20 temples, but you may like going to only 2 of them. And that is an emotional state that you develop once you go to a temple. There's a connection that gets established. It's probably to that deity. It's probably the way they dress up that deity. It's the way they decorate that deity. It is the way the temple vibrates with energy. It's the way when you sing something in that temple, the way the sound resonates inside the temple. All of that play a role in triggering your emotional characteristics. And once they give you a pleasant feeling, you would feel more connected to the temple and you would like to go there. So in that sense, temples now become a source, as I said, of that energy. And when no one is around you, then the silence in itself gives you a place where you can have some contemplation, some reflection. And I call this as admiration. So you are admiring that place. It doesn't matter who the deity is, but just the fact that there's so many like minds that come together and they all disperse. When they all come together, there's this gush of energy. When they disperse, there is absolute silence. Absolute silence. And in that silence, you find peace, you find self-reflection. That is another power of going to temples and enjoying the bliss of those temples. Now, clearly, the routine of also going to a temple brings in a discipline. Clearly, you are taking time away from all the activities you do into a place where I said you can contemplate and reflect. You clearly develop a social community support even in this day and age. When you go to a temple, you get to meet people, you can develop a community support there. And then when you help a temple, that could be through the service you offer, to the voluntary work you do, through the financial contributions you offer, whatever way you do, you are essentially helping a place develop where hopefully more and more individuals are coming to that place to inculcate practices of service, inculcate practices of charity, inculcate practices of discipline, and eventually become a better spiritual person.